the tool you're going to be using for this assignment is the pen tool. So with the pen tool, I want to make sure that I have shape selected. You could also select path, for example, and path is used for making selections, but we want to make sure that shape is selected because the path doesn't have a fill to it. So we have our shape selected here. Now I can click, 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 and then when I get to the end, I notice a little O or circle underneath the cursor, and that indicates that it's closing the shape. Now the other type of, I can also make a curve with the pen tool, so if I click, and then I open it up, and then this handle appears if I click and drag, rather than just releasing, I click and drag. So I'll do it again, I'll click and drag, and then I get the handles come out. And you can go and you can adjust the handles. So I have the white arrow tool. See, there's two arrow tools. There's the black one, which selects the entire shape, and then there's the white one, which you can use to select just the individual points and handles. Now, as a general rule, we never want these handles to cross. You'll notice if these handles cross, the shapes start getting carried away. You know, you start losing control of the shape if these handles cross. So I would avoid that. There's also kind of a grace to the handles as well. You want to have a nice smooth relationship to each other. And if I extend past this point and go up, that's not a good thing to do either. That you get like a weird shapes when you do that. So I'm going to erase these two shapes. And now let's take a look at outlining this bird. I'm going to zoom in really close. And let's look at there are certain points that really define the shape. So, for example, right here, this point here is a subtle point, but it's really important in getting a sense, in making this not just like a blob, but a bird's head. And again, right here, there's another point. I can see that point, it curves and it hooks in over here. And there's a little divot here where the eye is separate from the rest of the head. And getting these little points here are really what are going to give you an authentic looking image. So I can take the pen tool, do a straight line here. Now you could go around and just make lots of little points like this around, like this. But this is not a good vector. This is not what it might look okay, on my screen, but if you were to enlarge the vector, if you were to try to enlarge this vector, you'd actually see all these little lines, and it would not look so great. The other thing is it's really hard to manipulate this vector. Photoshop is really not the best tool for vectors. Really, for vectors, you want to be using Adobe Illustrator for complex vector manipulation. Adobe Illustrator is like Photoshop, except it's designed specifically for vectors, and you can manipulate them in all kinds of ways. Now, if you have all these little points like this, and let's say I decided, I want to make this bird's neck longer, well, I can't just, it's going to be much harder to work with this shape. So we want to have as few points as we need, but we don't want to miss anything. We want to make sure that every point we need is there, but we don't want anything that's not needed. Actually get into that little point here, and you can zoom in as close as you need to. I'm not going to do this in as much detail as I would if I was doing a finished project, but this is for my demonstration. You can go in more detail than what I'm doing right now, but make sure I get the actual point. Now the bird's beak here has a, and you can notice that this shape can be defined with 3 points. 1, 2, 3. There's a little arc here. There's an arc here. And then there's the bird's eye. There's a little divot over here. There's an arc. Soft arc over here. Longer arc. You notice that the color is flip sides, but once I close it, the color will be correct. So on these broad sections, I don't need to be nearly as close. But then if I want to get this kind of tip right here, I have to come in closer. You might notice too that there's these feathers, so at a point where the feather ends, that it's something you might want to keep an eye on too. I'm going to turn my fill off so I can see what's happening here. There's a soft curve that I missed there. I'm going to back up. Here's an interesting little shape. Now, actually capturing that, it's going to be a small detail, but these little things help. And this is one of these areas you can see in these wings here, in the tips of the feathers, that you could kind of do this roughly and go like this, but that's not going to look nearly as good as if I actually get this. You notice how there's a curve and then it comes up to a point. You'll see that in the final shape. You definitely will see the difference between a kind of a sloppier versus more precise. It doesn't mean necessarily that you need to get every single little bump. And there's some shapes, for example, if you had a cat that was furry, you don't need to get every single little hair. That becomes, requires a little bit more artistic interpretation, where you have to interpret the shape in a way that looks correct in a vector, even if it's not exactly accurate. I'm not going to finish this shape right now for the demonstration. I'm actually just going to cut it off here. I'm going to circle off, and you can see this one half of the bird that I completed, and you can see how, you know, I have this beautiful wing here, and how all these little, you know, these little divots and little things like that, they all work to make it like a realistic looking wing. And now I could take this and I can move it around. You know, you can manipulate it in different ways. You know, you can also edit the vectors are really great at editing it. So don't feel like you have to be perfect the first time around. You can come into the vector and you can select it, and then you can add points. So if I go to the, I can add a point, I can remove a point. Oops. I can add a point, I can remove a point. You can convert a point from a curve to a corner. So I could add this point here, and then I could convert it to a corner if I want to. The same tool can, you know, then convert it back. I pull out, and this will also, this tool, you can also use it to, you know, readjust your curve completely. You know, you can use the white arrow tool and, you know, adjust any of these points and handles as you need to. And so if I was submitting this, I would work my way all around the tail and complete the shape. So notice my file, I have the actual source file in here, and I also have the vector as well. So I have these elements are going to be necessary in your assignment file.